JP Morgan Chase is a whale of a company made up of many smaller fish. This company is the result of a merger of many large banks, such as Chase Manhattan Bank, Bear Stearns, Bank One, and Washington Mutual. Chase Manhattan Bank was formed in 1955 when Chase National Bank purchased the Bank of the Manhattan Company. The Bank of Manhattan Company was originally formed in 1799 by Aaron Burr and was the third oldest banking corporation in the United States. Currently, Chase becomes the first bank to introduce the retail credit card and pioneer the introduction of automatic teller machines. Subsequently, J.P. Morgan & Co. was a commercial and investment banking institution founded by J.P. Morgan in 1871. Financing the formation of the United States Steel Corporation and then multiple railroads led to J.P. Morgan Bank becoming the world's first billion-dollar corporation. The passage of the Glass-Steagall Act in 1933 forced J.P. Morgan to separate its investment banking from its commercial banking operations. J.P. Morgan & Company chose to operate as a commercial bank due to the stock market crash of 1929, tarnishing the reputation of investment banking. Finally, in the year 2000, J.P. Morgan & Company merges with Chase Manhattan Bank to form one firm under the name of J.P. Morgan Chase & Company, creating one of the largest and oldest banking institutions in New York City. J.P. Morgan Chase & Company merges with Bank One in 2004 and acquires Bear Stearns and Washington Mutual in 2008 during the financial crisis. Along the way, J.P. Morgan Chase & Company's predecessors financed many famous projects, such as the pedestal for the Statue of Liberty, the Panama Canal, and the Brooklyn Bridge. Large multinational and emerging companies, institutional investors, and individuals alike turn to J.P. Morgan Chase for their capital, insights, and solutions. J.P. Morgan, interestingly enough, refers to their products as solutions. These solutions can include investment banking, asset management, private banking, wealth management, and treasury services. J.P. Morgan aims to be one of the most respected financial services firms in the world, serving corporations and individuals alike in over 100 countries. Based on the most recent financials of 2017, J.P. Morgan Chase had almost $100 billion in revenue and an earnings per share of $6.35 per share.
Since the merger of J.P. Morgan and Chase, the company has produced annual net income of over $1 billion each year. In 2012, J.P. Morgan Chase & Company produced record annual profits of about $21.3 billion. Ironically, in the same year, the company incurred about $6.2 billion of trading losses. How is this possible, you might ask? A trader by the name of Bruno Ixiel, an employee in the Chief Investment Office, which is located in their London branch, was involved in a series of complex credit derivative trades and risky investments. In the beginning, Ixiel's derivative trades started to incur some losses. In response, he increased the size of his bets but failed to cover them with adequate hedges. Eventually, the bank's loss positions grew so large that they disrupted the market. The size of the losses earned Ixiel the nickname the London Whale because the position he had taken in the credit derivative index was so large the crash swallowed the market. Ixiel did not face criminal charges. He claimed that responsibility for the losses should fall on senior management. However, his former boss, Javier Martin Artajo, and another trader, Julian Grout, were charged with securities fraud. As the losses started to grow, they concealed the losses from company management as well as the British regulators. Ultimately, the fraud cost J.P. Morgan Chase & Company about $6.2 billion in trading losses, $7.2 billion in legal fees, and $1 billion in fines. In addition, investors filed lawsuits which cost the company about $150 million to settle. Financially, J.P. Morgan Chase & Company sustained the debacle, but the CEO, Jamie Dimon, and the company have faced strict scrutinization from the SEC, investors, and the rest of the public. Dimon was criticized specifically because the bank misled investors and avoided regulators as the losses grew. Next, we will discuss ICSIL's trading strategy to show how these losses could grow to such a large amount.
I'm Keith Cantrell, and I'm going to explain what happened during the 2012 JP Morgan Chase trading loss, also known as the London Whale. As we know, this loss occurred because of trader Bruno ICSIL's strategy to bet against the derivatives market located in JP Morgan Chase's chief investment office in London. To explain what happened, I'm going to look at three discrete components of ICSIL's trading strategy.
Strategy 1. Bruno ICSIL at JP Morgan was tasked with hedging the firm's risk. The instrument he used in order to mitigate these risks was a credit default swap on high-yield bonds. Briefly, a credit default swap works like this. We have an investor, a borrower, and an insurer. The investor has $1,000 and the borrower would like to borrow $1,000. The investor would like to loan the $1,000 but is restricted to only lending to A-rated borrowers. Our borrower has a B rating. However, our insurer has an A rating, so the investor loans the money to the borrower but then gives a percentage of the interest to the insurer to pay for insurance to protect the investor in case the borrower defaults. In a normal insurance market, the insurer would be required to have the capital or liquidity to back up the insurance policy. This is not the case with credit default swaps. Strategy 2. As mentioned before, ICSIL was using credit default swaps as insurance to hedge JP Morgan's risk. ICSIL realizes that his first strategy was not performing as expected, so he creates a second strategy to hedge against his first strategy. Strategy 2 was to use groups of credit default swaps that were insuring investment-grade bonds from 121 different users. ICSIL's theory was that writing credit default swaps on investment bonds takes advantage of an improving economy. ICSIL was writing large amounts of these Strategy 2 credit default swaps, so much that the market took notice and started to bet against him. Strategy 3. To counter the market's reaction to Strategy 2, he created Strategy 3 to buy credit default swaps that were insuring investment-grade bonds. One of the major problems in ICSIL's overall strategy is the fact that it's hard to make a direct correspondence between the hedge and the risk. The relationship between the hedge and the risk is known as basis risk. It's hard to see a direct connection between this three-tiered credit default strategy and the risks they were intended to mitigate. The second major flaw in ICSIL's strategy was the use of credit default swaps, which we showed earlier can suffer from lack of liquidity. At one point, ICSIL's trading with Strategy 2 was so large that he created a gap of the price of the index and the sum of the prices of the underlying credit default swaps themselves. Buying credit default swaps on the whole index was cheaper than buying credit default swaps on all 121 companies that it comprised of. This gap is where the term the London Whale comes from.
Hi, my name is Brad, and I'm going to be talking about how ERM could have prevented the debacle.
JP Morgan prided itself on having the best risk management practices in the financial industry, having survived the 2007 and 2009 financial crisis in better shape than most of their competitors. However, risk management practices in the bank's chief investment office were lacking the personnel and structure necessary to properly risk manage the synthetic credit portfolio. During this time, there was a lot of transitioning roles in key positions, not only within the CIO risk management group, but as well as the firm-wide. There was a new chief risk officer within the CIO, and there was a new firm chief risk officer and a new firm head of market risk. As any new job, there was a learning curve for these new officers in their new roles. This allowed the risk to go undetected, which eventually led to the debacle. Senior management was not aware of how risky the investments were becoming, and had the riskiness of the portfolios been known, the company could have potentially tried to offset the risk with a different investment, or they could have tried to stop the additional investments that were made, which could have overall lessened the impact of the event.
Hi, my name is Sanya, and I'm going to discuss the after effects of the London Whale trades. As a result of this trading debacle, JP Morgan immediately paid $920 million in fines to US and British regulators. The CEO, Jamie Dimon, did not step down but took a 50% pay cut. Bruno Ixel struck a deal to avoid criminal prosecution and has yet to be tried. Some of the immediate effects were a drop in the share price and significant loss in shareholder value. This also led to the departure of multiple top executives within the company. JP Morgan was tasked with repairing its now tarnished reputation. This case showed the difficulty of holding individuals responsible for corporate wrongdoings. Regulators fined the company while the individuals involved got off scot-free. Also, considering JP Morgan's overall revenues, the fine was a very small percentage in comparison, leading to the question of how effective this is in discouraging similar behavior in the future. Most importantly, this fiasco demonstrated the importance of strong internal controls and effective risk management to a company's success. JP Morgan had multiple issues when it came to controls, which allowed these large losses to accumulate and be covered up for so long. When it came to the London trades, only one person was in charge of checking the books for accuracy, even though these derivatives were both complex and high in volume. No internal controls existed to prevent and detect its traders from fraudulently overvaluing investments to conceal hundreds of millions of dollars in losses. Since no effective system was in place, senior management failed to respond properly to warning signals and was unaware of the scale of the problems. The firm did not ensure the controls and oversight of the investment office evolved with the increased complexity and risks of the traders' activities. An effective risk management system, endorsed by the board and top management, could have laid out the impact of possible losses ahead of time and had processes in place to prevent something like this from ever happening.